Hello. I hope you don't mind that I just came in from the sun with my hat on. I'm here to talk to you guys a little bit about what I was reading from the first part of our second week, and also what I was reading from you guys in the discussion board because it got pretty lively. There was quite a debate going on, mostly concerning the concept and the idea of abortion and birth control. So before I get into that conversation, I want to just sort of go over the readings a little bit from the first part of the week. I know I'm a day late, but I figure you guys still remember them since it was only yesterday. Um, so I'm going to start on page 542 of the book, The First and Second Waves of Feminism in the U.S. by Amy Kesselman. And one thing that I kind of wanted to address is what most of you guys have already said. We come from a long line of women's activists and feminists, although the word didn't come about until a little bit later. But basically, the way that this article is laid out is it divides the feminism as a whole into two waves, the first and the second wave. And so the first one began around the Civil War in the 1800s and went all the way up through the 1920s when women gained the right to vote. White women gained the right to vote. And there's a lot of talk in this article about the different branches of feminism, and it talks a lot about how heterosexual white feminism was the predominant form of feminism. And what I want you to notice about Kesselman's article is, although she does do a lot of work to try to show that other nationalities, ethnicities, and cultures had feminist movements as well, she herself sort of relegates these to side movements or sub-movements of a national movement that was white and heterosexual. And she sort of argues against that to say there are all kinds of different feminisms, but she herself sort of makes that same exact gesture to push those other types of feminism to the side. And so even though this book is called a multicultural anthology, it really still is focused on heterosexual white feminism, although other movements were taking place at the exact same time. But to sort of stick to the book, she divides it up into two waves. So the first wave until the 1920s, and then she says that there was sort of a lull or a dip until the civil rights movement of the 1960s, and then we get what we're calling the second wave of feminism. Well, what she doesn't discuss is that there are also at least two more waves of feminism. A lot of people call the wave of feminism that began in academia in the 1990s with the gender wars or the sex wars, they call that the third wave of feminism. And so it was sort of an intellectualized or a high-minded or a high art way of dealing with feminism, and it basically happened within academia and then it spread outward, right? And so we got our first women in gender studies programs in the 1960s and 1970s, and believe it or not, University of Kentucky was one of the first universities to offer women in gender studies courses, so go UK. But in the 1990s, we see this resurgence of feminism during the gender and the culture wars. And then again, people are kind of saying now, or feminists or philosophers are saying now, that we're in more like a fourth wave of feminism in the 2000s. And then some people are even saying that we're in a post-feminist era, so that we have moved past feminism, or that we no longer have a need for feminism. Well, I think that most of you guys have been articulating on your wall that that's just not true, that we actually do still need feminism, and if we don't believe that, then all we really have to do is listen to what people are saying, and figure out from that that there are still vastly different expectations for men and for women, and just based on the simple fact that we still insist that men and women are two very separate things, and that they're mutually exclusive, and that they can never sort of mesh in the middle, and we can't have transgendered, and that's wrong or immoral or abnormal. And so until we sort of overcome these stereotypes and these binary divisions, these double-sided or two-way either-or ways of thinking, feminism is still very active and alive, and it's necessary. We need that kind of education. A lot of you guys did say that on your wall, that the way to overcome a lot of these stereotypes and biases and preconceived notions is through education. And so that's why I'm glad that you guys are here. That's why I'm glad that it's students exactly like you who come back over and over throughout the semesters, who take courses like this, that keep women's studies alive and that keep this discipline invigorated and new and passionate and activist. So go you and go us for educating ourselves on the truth and the realities of gender and sexuality and sex. A couple more things that I wanted to point out here. A lot of you guys mentioned in your responses on the discussion board wall so far that you thought that it was really bizarre and weird and a little unfair that racism sort of played a part in the first and second waves of feminism. And yeah, it isn't right or it isn't fair, but I kind of wanted to talk a little more about that to make sure that you understood exactly why that was happening. And so when when women first started to stand up for themselves, and very few select men, like Frederick Douglass, if you didn't know, was one of the few men who stood up in the 1900s and said, this is not cool, we need to sort of fight for women. But um, one of the things that happened during that time, I lost my train of thought, give me a second. Racism. One of the things that happened during that time was basically white heterosexual women saw a goal for themselves. They recognized a goal for themselves, and it was gender equality, although they didn't call it that. They called it women's rights. And they were basically looking to have the right to vote, have the right to own property, a very few sort of beginning rights that then future generations could continue to build on. And so in order to make sure that they were really driven toward that goal and really focused on that one goal, they had to sort of make all these other goals fall to the side. And so while a lot of early feminists and women's rights activists believed in the fight against, let's say, slavery or racism, they didn't take that fight up within the bounds of feminism, because feminism was just the rights of women, and basically white heterosexual women. And so to sort of complicate that or make that more complex or messy that with other types of fights, like the fight against slavery or the fight against racism, that would have confused a lot of the focus, right? So you can imagine if you have one very specific goal and you're in one line to meet that, and then you start going off left and right and left and right and left and right and fighting all of these side battles, that your main objective or your main trajectory sort of becomes muddled. And so that's one of the reasons why racism played such a big part in early feminism, is because they had one very specific goal, and it included just the rights of women, and primarily the rights of white women. They saw the rights of African American women and women of color as a secondary fight, or a fight better left to those women of color and those of other nationalities. So in essence, white women took up the fight for white women, and the other ones out of necessity fell to the wayside. And so that's kind of what happened with racism. And we see that in other movements too. Like if you are in the civil rights movement and you're fighting for African American liberty, you're not fighting for Asian American liberty. Or if you're fighting for gay rights, you're not really focused on African Americans. So we still see that kind of movement, and it's just a matter of when you get inside one of these movements, you get focused toward that one direction, and other things sort of have to fall to the wayside in order for you to meet that one goal. One thing that did kind of happen, though, was the way that feminism did work. It set up a sort of model or a sort of rubric for other civil rights movements to follow. And so, for example, the gay rights movement, or the African American rights movement, or all the other different kinds of movements that have taken place since the feminist or women's rights movements, especially the first wave, most of the other movements have sort of followed suit. Just like your text said that, I think it was maybe Perkins Gilman who said this. I can't remember exactly the right one, but one of the women from the first wave of feminism said it was the woman who had to stand up for the woman. And so just like that, when the African American liberties movement took place in the 1960s, it was the African American who stood up for the African American. And so it's kind of happened over and over and over. The gay rights movement right now, it didn't begin with a bunch of straight people saying, hey, look over there, those gay people need rights. It happened with gay people saying, hey, we need rights. And with women in the women's rights movements, the women said, we need rights. And so these movements have to begin with the people who are most affected by them. Let me see if there's anything else that I want to sort of tackle. I've only got like 1 more minute, so I guess I'm going to start another video to talk a little bit about the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention and the Declaration of Sentiments, because I wanted to sort of get into the parallels between the Declaration of Sentiments and the Declaration of Independence, which the Declaration of Sentiments was written by women, for women, and the Declaration of Independence was written by men for men. And so I sort of want to get into a little conversation about that and see what you guys have to say about that, but I'm going to start another video to do that, so make sure you watch that too.